Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Cope Life Nation show with me, your host, Dr. Charleston Gaines. And as you know, this show, Cope Life Nation, is about people choosing to live every day with kindness, optimism, positivity, and empathy. But what's really going on is there are different ways that we can demonstrate that. And one of the ways that we can demonstrate that is by getting involved with matters around the world that truly matter even to people beyond our own environments, beyond our own circumstances. And I want to give you an example before I bring my guest on. I want to give you an example of some things that I heard about, some things that I read about, but I was not involved, and I read about them after the fact, right? And so one thing that comes to mind is the concept of rape camps. And so, if you didn't hear me correctly, what I said are rape camps. And I'm talking specifically about during the Balkan Wars of the 90s. And I believe it started around 91, 92, 1992, the late 1900s, as some of the younger folks would say. But so I think it started when I was a sophomore or junior in high school. And then there was a massacre in Srebrenica in Bosnia Herzegovina in 1993. And so what happened was in this massacre, there were Serbian troops led by Ratko Mladic. He was a Serb general. And they came upon this town, Srebrenica, in Bosnia, and it was the largest genocide since World War II. They separated the men and the boys with the women and the girls and younger children. And what they said was that they were going to send the all of them to a refugee camp, but they were going to send them via different routes. So they're going to all the men and boys on one bus, and then all the women and girls and little children on other buses. So they go to different places, right? But what happened was the women and girls kept showing up at the UN refugee camps, but the men and boys never made it. What was happening is the men and boys on those buses were being taken to places to be slaughtered. And over a long weekend, I think it was 3 to 5 days, I'm not sure, over a long weekend, over 8,300 Bosnian men and boys were executed. And we know all of these details because there were a couple who survived. But remember, I told you the words rape camp. And so what rape camps were the UN refugee site was set up essentially with permission from the Serbian army. They said, we're not going to attack, we're not going to kill these people. And then what would happen is the Serbs would show up to the camp and they would pick some women and girls, and then they would take them away to be raped by other Serb soldiers. What they were doing was using these women and girls to provide a service. And before I go on, I'm just going to say that this is a hard hitting episode, and my guest, Dr. Lina AbiRafeh, is going to tell some very powerful stories. And I just want to throw that out there because I may get emotional too. But understand the gravity of what I'm telling you. They would take these women and these girls to be used to be raped by the soldiers, and then they would be brought back to the refugee camp. And when they were brought back, the other women in the camp would run to these victims of sexual violence and immediately begin to support and encourage them to convince them not to take their own lives. And what we're going to talk about today is we're going to have a conversation for you to understand that that's just one example. And I've read about these things, and I've read about violence against women. I've read about sexual violence, and I've talked to people about it. But today, my guest has actually been in these spaces helping to save women and girls from sexual violence. And the reason we're going to talk more later, but I just want to say, from my perspective, the bottom line reason why she did it was because it needed to be done. Now, so without further ado, I'm going to bring on my guest, Dr. Lina AbiRafeh. I'm so excited and honored to have you here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. How are you doing?
I am great. I mean, this is an honor and a privilege. Thank you so much.
It's funny I have you here, but in reality, I could just talk about you for the next hour. I don't even need you here to talk about the things you've done that I admire so much.
You can mute me anytime and keep going.
so, so I just want to start off. First of all, I just want to know, when I talk about you as someone I admire, a hero to me, I also want people to understand that you are also what we consider a normal human being. And so, what I want is for people just to know, like, tell us about who you are. Just kind of tell us about your life and what's going on.
I mean, I got to start at the beginning, right? I think the
Yes.
backstory really informs who we are today. And I am Lebanese and Palestinian, an immigrant in the US, an Arab American, all sorts of hyphenated things, never really belonged anywhere, wasn't raised in any of the countries that I was supposed to be from, was raised in Saudi Arabia, in fact, which is a great place to start thinking about gender issues. But a background in war zones, and being a woman, I mean, that's already enough of a war zone in so many ways. So all of that, I was just a kid who asked a lot of questions and who, for reasons that I can't even explain, had a very keen sense of what is right and what is not fair. It was really the things that upset me and that made me angry. That was the stuff that set me on this trajectory because I saw things that I didn't like and that I couldn't accept. And so, like you said, I just had to do it because if I wasn't going to do it, I couldn't live with myself. And that's really how it happened. I think everyone's got that thing that pushes the button or crosses the red line and makes you so upset that you have to stand up and say, enough, I won't tolerate this. And so that's what I did.
So, before we dig into your story, what do you say to someone who is is outraged by it, but they don't take action or they don't know how to take action? Maybe I should ask this in 45 minutes, but I want to ask now, and I can ask again later.
Do it.
But someone they're going to see this, they're going to hear about things that they didn't know were going on, and they're going to say, "I want to do something." What do you tell them?
I love this. And yeah, it's worth repeating later as well. But first of all, I would say we all have to open our eyes and see that this is everywhere all around us. It is far too easy to say, oh, well, that's not me and that's not us. That's not here. That's not now. That's them over there. It's far away. It'll never happen. If it ever did, it's done now. And I am here to tell you it is not. The problem is it is everywhere. And sometimes when things are everywhere, you just stop seeing them, you normalize them. So the first step really is to see it and to pay attention. And once you see it, you can never unsee it. And there is going to be a thing, it might not be all of these things because I mean, this is a difficult world and there's a lot going on that should make us upset. And I keep saying, if we're not angry about something, then we're asleep. But if once you find that thing, that line that is crossed for you, you can stand up and do the work that needs doing right where you are. I happen to do it in countries all around the world, but I didn't have to. I could have stayed right here. I'm in New York right now. I could have done it right here in the States and still had a lifetime of work to do. So that's what I would say. Start where you stand.
I love that. I love start where you stand. And I want to add to that a little bit because when we say start where you stand, a lot of times we can hear something that makes us angry or upset. And then along with the upset comes a little confusion. And so for me, a big part of it is understanding why you're upset, understanding your values. Why does this bother me? So that you can put some rhyme and reason behind your thoughts, which can enable you to turn those thoughts into action. And one place that I say start, for you, it's you say to be aware of it. So yes, let's be aware of what's going on. That's the first step. And then for me, the second step is letting your inner circle know that you're not okay with it, right? Before I stop crying in Tampa, where I'm in Tampa, before I stop crying in Tampa, maybe I should check some people in my inner circle. And maybe it's not even about telling them what they can or cannot do. Maybe it's just expressing my values. I am not okay with this behavior. And it doesn't have to be grotesque violence. I'm not okay with hearing you speak to your wife or kids that way. I'm not okay with you treating your husband that way. Bro, I don't think you needed to use that tone of voice.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you do that, then you begin to affect small changes. But if change is your value, then you can take pride in those small changes. Man, we can we can go on. We might have a part 2, 3, 5, and 13 for this.
But you're right. It is in the small things, you know. It's not like marching off to the rape camps and the example that you gave earlier. It is, you know, what happens to all of us is the microaggressions. It's death by a thousand paper cuts, as they say. But, you know, if it's death by a thousand paper cuts, then it's salvation by a thousand micro gestures. It is
Wow.
that precise moment that you say, enough, don't harass her, you know, don't scare her. She's walking alone. You don't need to follow her. You're freaking her. You know, don't be that guy. Stop. Just telling people, because I believe there are more good people out there than we think, but they are silent.
Yes.
How do we
Yes.
get them to raise their voices? It's like building a muscle. You got to build your activist or social justice muscle. You're not
It,
going to go and like deadlift, you know, 100 pounds on day one. You're going to be like, oh God, this 5 pounder, it's heavy. And that's okay. It's going to get easier. But you got to develop the muscle to be able to address those issues that you see, you know, in at home, on the street, in the workplace, whatever it is, you know, share in the conversation, ask people what they need, listen to what they say, act on that, you know, all that stuff. It's right there for the taking.
it absolutely is. It absolutely is. But I will say this: while we all can do that, and we all should choose to do that, there are some of us, or maybe one of us, who said, I'm going to go a little bit further. And so, what I want to do, I'm completely setting you up. I'm completely setting you up here. Is I want to show a video, a short clip from your TED talk. And really, I actually thought about just showing your whole TED talk here, but I want a little more original content. But I'm going to show the short clips. It's about a minute long. And then from here, we're going to dive into some of the work that you've done.
Gotcha.
Fear. Once you feel unsafe in a place, it's hard to ever feel safe there again. So, what was I doing in Nepal? Well, I went to Nepal to work. I work in humanitarian emergencies, conflicts, natural disasters, the world's messy stuff. And in the middle of that messy stuff, I work on preventing sexual violence. Or at least I'm trying to. Anyway, the thing is, after a war or a natural disaster, in the middle of all the chaos, all the things we count on to protect us and support us, law and order, systems, services, safety nets, all of those things are damaged and destroyed. So at those times, you'd think we all step up, stand up, stick together. Well, not really. At those times, sexual violence actually increases. So when we think the emergency is over, for women, the emergency is actually just beginning.
Such powerful words, such powerful words. And and I'm trying to pick which of my questions to dive into right now. And I guess the first thing I think of, and I'm choosing this because the number of natural disasters continues to increase. We just see more volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, large hurricanes, tornadoes. We see more of all of these things. And so as we see more of them, why is sexual violence so prevalent after the natural disaster?
Well, you know, the idea that, and this is hard for people to believe, you know, the idea that we turn on women is something that you can't even imagine to be true, because you think, well, an earthquake, I mean, everybody's affected. The earthquake's not going to discriminate. You know, it destroys all of us, all of our structures, our livelihoods, our lives. Everybody loses the same. But what I'm talking about really is in the immediate aftermath, where we have nothing. Our lives are destroyed. Everything we know is in shambles. And what happens there is we tend to turn on the weakest in the community, those who are already vulnerable, namely women and girls, who become even more vulnerable as a result of the emergency. And of course, marginalized groups, ethnic minorities, all of those people who already are on the periphery of society before the tragedy end up much worse off. So the reason for that is, I mean, we've seen it everywhere. It is the ugliest byproduct of humanity. It seems to be the way we cope. I talk about it after Hurricane Katrina right here in the States. I saw it in Haiti after the earthquake. I saw it in Sri Lanka after the tsunami. It just happens everywhere and it doesn't stop. And in the immediate aftermath, it's sexual violence. And in the longer term, it's intimate partner violence. Why? Because we've lost everything. We don't have homes and jobs and security or anything at all. And we don't seem to know. I mean, when I say we, the vast majority are men who are perpetrators. Men don't seem to know how to cope with those losses without taking them out on the people who they're supposed to love and protect. That's what happens.
When you say that, I think of so many different variables in that. And so, first of all, you specifically say men. And I want people to understand what happens in the brains of men and women when it comes to emergency situations. It's the same, right? From a neuroscience standpoint, it's the same. However, there's tons of research that shows just over 96% of sexual assaults are perpetrated by men. And so it's not an opinion and it's not man bashing. We're not saying that 96% of men do it. We're saying that of the events that occur, 96% of them are perpetrated by men. So there are lots of men who are also part of the helpers, part of the people who are not involved in that. But this goes back to what you said earlier of being aware of it. Because it's one thing to say, I'm not part of the problem. My friends don't do that. I haven't been involved in that. I was in this natural disaster and I didn't get involved in that. And that can be true because you're a good person, because you have morals and you have values. However, if you are not aware of the problem, you couldn't do anything to resolve the problem, which is not a point for people to feel guilty. It's more of a motivation to open your eyes a little bit more the next time you encounter something. And really, what happens is people go back to their most basic, fundamental, natural selves. So, for example, when everything in your life was as good as it's supposed to be, of course you're thinking about, do I want chicken or steak? Which sport do I want to watch? Take my kids to the game, all of these kinds of things. But when those are no longer options, and you kind of stay in a steady state of survival, what happens is you're trying to calm your nerves, you're trying to settle down, and there's a group of people who will use and will victimize the women and the girls to accomplish that. It's sad, it's disgusting, and it literally is violence. And so you say that, and that's the why. But at the same time it happens, it can be pre-planned, I guess is what I'm saying, right? So there's ways that the brain works after a natural disaster. But there's also things such as rape camps and rape used as a weapon, and even UN peacekeepers almost using rape as a way, almost acting as if they've earned it, or they deserve
Mhm.
sex, like it's something they're entitled to. And so what do you say about it? It sounds disgusting to say, but how do you, I don't know, just give me your thoughts on the pre-planned the organized sexual violence in war zones?
Well, there are a lot of issues there. We say that women's bodies are the new battleground, and that is when there are two groups that are rivals and one wants to punish the other. They do so on what are supposed to be the most treasured, protected, but also most vulnerable parts of society, the women. And so they use the women to teach the men a lesson. So there's that aspect of it where bodies are the battlegrounds on which war is waged. So sending a message almost through these women's bodies to say, look what we can do to your women. The other part of it is sexual exploitation, where people who are in positions of power take advantage of that power because all of a sudden they find that they're important. They've got something that society wants, and they want to extract favors or services or something in order to give what they should be giving for free. Humanitarian aid is a great example. You should never have to do anything to receive it. It is aid. It is given to everybody equally in principle. But part of the challenge with people in leadership and power, peacekeepers you mentioned, and others who say, well, I'm controlling the rations here, and here you are, a woman, begging me for help, begging me for more, maybe, telling me some sad story about the children you can't feed. Well, why don't you show me how badly you want it? So the idea of withholding services and support in order to extract favors, largely sexual, is something that we actually see everywhere. I mean, that's the whole Me Too movement, and Harvey Weinstein we took down for that very reason. Promising young women careers in Hollywood on the screen if they agreed to sleep with him. And so we see this all the time with people who take advantage of the power that they've been given. They abuse it.
You say that, and the first thing that comes to mind is COVID. And one report that I heard, and we honestly, we live in a society where it's so easy to say, that's not my problem, that's not my business. However, there were organizations and communities who were trying to get, what do you like, a rent moratorium or mortgage moratorium or whatever, right? And that was denied in a lot of places. And I heard stories reported in various news sources that there were landlords saying that I will take sex for payment instead of money. And so what you're talking about is exactly that. And when we see people in positions of power, yes, there's a Harvey Weinstein, there's pro athletes, and there's politicians, but they're also landlords of small apartment communities. This isn't something that's exclusive to the most powerful. And I, I don't know, like I'm kind of going in circles because I think about how I don't believe anybody was prosecuted for that because we don't consider that sexual violence. And so I want to switch gears here, but before I do, I want to get your quick opinion about various aspects of sexual violence for which we have no laws.
Most of them we have no laws. I mean, I just want to go back to your great point about, you don't have to have that much power to be able to exploit it. And that's absolutely true. Even the tiniest imbalance of power, even that ability to say, all right, I want sex for rent, or I want sex for food, or I want sex for work, or I want sex for, you need medical care for your daughter. Okay, well, even the tiniest things, anytime there is an imbalance and you have something that somebody wants, it could be a sandwich, right? And the thing is, it doesn't take a lot to put people in those kinds of positions. It's not something that happens to the absolute poor and destitute in war zones in countries we can't find on a map. You used COVID as an example, and I think that's absolutely true because that happened everywhere. I mean, if any of us, you or me or anyone, were in a position where we had no other choice and our survival was on the line, we would do whatever it takes. We really would, especially for our children, or people we care about, or our own lives. That is what we do because we have to. And when people put us in those kinds of positions, they are just exploiting that desperate need because they know that it is there. And it's hideous. But you ask about, go ahead, because
No, go
I can
ahead, go
keep
ahead.
going. Oh, I was going to continue with your question,
Yes, do.
which was about, I mean, where there is no justice or where there is no punishment, right? Or where there is,
Right.
I mean,
What,
the challenge. Go ahead.
where there's no specific law. Like I didn't see anyone so when the landlord says during COVID, because you can't work because your building is shut down, you get paid by the hour, you can't pay rent, so I will accept sexual favors for rent. And when a landlord does that, that's not breaking the law in some places. And we look at a lot of times look at things as either it broke the law or it didn't. And if it was immoral or not is not my business. So, again, looking at forms of sexual violence for which there is no law that's being broken.
Well, technically, I mean, that would count as coercion, and we are
Yes.
looking for cases where there is consent. Now, the challenge is we talk about the law. The law is the weakest link when it comes to cases of sexual violence, because for whatever reason, a woman will come forward and say, "I've been raped, and here's the scenario," and what will she get? An avalanche of questions, scrutiny about her sexual history, what she was wearing and why, and where she was and who she was with and what she was drinking, and married or not, kids or not, partners or not, everything. They dig up all of it. They never look at that case in isolation. I mean, it is not viewed like any other crime. I mean, if I went to the police and say, "Hey, I was mugged," they're not going to say, "Well, what were you wearing and where were you and what were you drinking and why did you carry that purse that's a muggable purse?" No one is
Right.
going to tell you any of that. But if you come in with a report of sexual violence, it is like you are asking to be re-victimized, which is the way things seem to work. And that's a whole other form of violence that we don't talk about. And so we wonder, how come women don't report? Would anybody under those circumstances? Justice is hardly ever served for women. And if it is, the sentence is so light and it is just glossed over as if this is just a normal part of, what happens. And she shouldn't have been there and she shouldn't have done that. And there you go, and the guy is serving 3 months or 6. And that's the end of it. And we don't ever hear the story again. Meanwhile, her life is ruined.
That's absolutely true. And now I'm going to get to the switching gears part because that's absolutely true. And what we said earlier about being aware of it, so many of us are aware of it. I guarantee you that when people did things like that, they bragged about it, right? And so there are people who maybe are landlords and they have friends who just have other jobs and they said, "Look at me, look what I did. I'm the man." And so within their circle, or maybe even a larger part of the community, that's acceptable. And so from that, I want to go to another community form of violence, which I would say is more gruesome, but to some degree, trauma is trauma. So I saw in your TED talk where you mentioned when you were 14 years old, you had a research project, and you can give more of the details because I don't want to mess it up. But I will just say that at the age of 14, you decided to educate yourself and some others, some peers, about female genital mutilation. That like I feel disgusted saying those words. Like that made me uncomfortable on the inside just saying those words. But you went deeper than that.
You know, when I started to hear about these things, I was very young. I mean, 14 is pretty young. And I don't know how to explain it other than this. I mean, it set off a bomb in my heart. And I was like, what do we do to each other? What is this? I mean, I would come home from school and stay up all night reading all the stuff they gave me, and I would just cry and feel so angry and frustrated and powerless and thinking, God, this is just the worst thing I have ever heard. The torture that we inflict on each other simply because we can. How do we allow this to happen? I mean, this isn't something from the past that's done and part of history. This is present and happening all the time and increasing. I mean,
Yes.
this isn't something we say, well, God, we solved that problem. No, I mean, in COVID, there were more cases of female genital mutilation that happened, more. So for me, I said, this is just the worst of it. At least that's, what I thought at the time. It's hard to say what the worst is because there's so many terrible things. But for 14-year-old me, it was the worst I'd ever heard. And I said, I've got to go deeper. And that's how I started, really. And it was built on a sense of the world being unfair to women and girls, and feeling as a girl at that time that I was viewed as less than. There was just a thing, there was a feeling, and it was in the air. It was it's hard to pin down, but when you start talking to girls, of my generation and certainly before, you realize that wasn't entirely uncommon. There, the media, society, the school curriculum, the way your parents treat you, the way your peers treat you, whatever. Everybody just has this sense that we're not equal. And you feel that in the messaging, you absorb that in the air, in your pores, and it just like, it sits there and rots. And that's how I felt. I felt like I was just less important because I was born into this body. And so anything that happened to girls was as if it was happening to me.
See, you say that the world is unfair, and people say, well, the world isn't fair. But it's one thing to say the world isn't fair, like I got 3 cookies and you got 2. It's another thing to say that it's overwhelming and it's rotting inside you. And that's a feeling that I think most people don't understand, and a lot of it has to do with relatability. And so for you to be an Arab woman, Lebanese and Palestinian, having grown up in Saudi Arabia, you're going to look at some things differently than certain people who grew up in certain kinds of families in New York City, Los Angeles, Hollywood, Miami. And I'm talking specifically about money and privilege, right? But when you talk about how it's unfair, what I also think about is how we have this kind of opinion that women put themselves in those situations. And let me explain. It goes back to what you said earlier about how, I don't remember exactly how you said it, or if you even said it here, or maybe a different conversation we had about how women do so much to sacrifice for our family. So more women are willing to do what is necessary to save their families. And so a lot of times it's this is what is required of me to stay alive and to keep other people alive. But then there are some people who, in the midst of their trauma, they are completely focused on saving other people's lives. And when I say some people, I mean women and moms. And then there are some people who, for them, the pain is unbearable. And so what I want to do is play another short clip from your TED Talk, and then we're going to dig into this side of it a little deeper.
In 2002, I moved to Afghanistan, where women said, "What is the point of discussing violence now, while our children have empty bellies?" And yet it's also where some Afghan women preferred to set themselves on fire than to live lives of violence.
That's the 853rd time that I've watched those 20 seconds, but it has the same impact on me every time. Of all of the things I've been through in my life, I can't think of a single moment where I would rather be on fire. And so this is a deep conversation, but can we talk about those kinds of women who would rather set themselves on fire?
I mean, you have to imagine situations where they are so trapped, they have no alternative. It's when hope has died. I think there's so many stories of triumph and difficult circumstances, and people find ways to persevere, and then they write great books and they turn them into movies, and everybody applauds because we love that kind of hero. But there are people for whom there really is no way out. And for them, in that situation, death is the easier option. And death by setting yourself on fire is also an even more extreme answer to that problem. So you've got to imagine this sense of hopelessness, right? Literally, hope has died and you have nothing left. You have no fight in you anymore. And what is happening is you are the victim over and over and over again. I mean, these are women who are abused and beaten and harmed in ways that we cannot imagine. And that happens a lot. I mean, Afghanistan is very extreme, certainly, but so many other countries, even right here in the States, like you think of women who are in abusive relationships who cannot leave them for so many reasons and end up just taking it over and over and living these lives where, somebody's quite literally beating the hope out of them. Nobody should have to live like that.
You
I mean, to extinguish hope is for me something that is hard to swallow. Once
see,
that's gone,
yeah, you say that, and I'm not going to quote research, but we know that there's a direct correlation between hopelessness and suicide. But I think about I think about how you can say there's no fight left in you, but at the same time, setting yourself on fire is fighting, because in your last gasp, literally your last breath, you say, someone is going to acknowledge my pain. Someone is going to see me, to hear me. You don't hear my words. You don't see my scars. You can't feel what I feel. So you're going to know that I set myself on fire. And I really can't imagine. I mean, I've been through some hard times. And the reason I've been through some hard times is because I'm human and we all go through some hard times. But I've never been in a situation where I woke up in the morning disappointed that I woke up in the morning. And so just that idea, and I don't want to get stuck on it. So I'm gonna try to move past it, but I can't imagine where where someone has experienced pain that is worse than setting yourself on fire. But with that, I want to kind of get into just the history of work that you've done. And so you mentioned Afghanistan in 2002, and and I just want to paint this picture for some people so that they understand what we're saying. Because I don't think everybody gets it. 9/11 happened. September 11th, 2001 happened. In October, we being the United States of America, sent in CIA personnel into Afghanistan. And during that month, we figured out bin Laden was there, different things with the Taliban and Al Qaeda, so on. So the idea was we're going to get them back. And that was justifiable, I believe. But shortly after that, the women there needed people like you to protect them from their own communities. So I'm not talking about ancient history. When we say 9/11, never forget, we're not the only ones. Americans are not the only ones who were harmed. And so I just wanted to say that as I'm really feeling it. I'm really feeling it right now. So I want to just move on. Um and so what happened after Afghanistan for you? Because it's not like Afghanistan was 6 months of violence, and then you move to, I don't know, Kabul, or I don't know why I said that. I was thinking Acapulco. I was thinking of a vacation resort. I was thinking Jamaica, but Kabul came to mind, maybe because it's in Afghanistan and there was lots of violence there too. But what was next for you after Afghanistan?
well, I stayed in Afghanistan for 4 years, which
Wow.
was, yeah, an unusually long time to stay there. And then I moved on to other war zones. After a while, I said, okay, I'm going to take what I've learned here and what I've tried to do and do this in other places. So I went to Sierra Leone. I went to Papua New Guinea, which is an unusual place to go because it's not a full blown war per se, but it is as violent as a war. So when it comes to violence against women, it was described to me as warlike. in terms
Wow.
of the severity. So that certainly, I got a job there, and I was like, okay, if that's where I am, where I need to go, then that's where I'm going. And so, for me, it wasn't ever a question of me kind of flipping through the map thinking like, where do I want to be? It is, where are things coming for me? Where am I needed? And where should I be next? And so, I went from one to the other to the other. After Papua New Guinea, I went to Haiti for the earthquake. And after that, I spent a couple of years across West and Central Africa, and I covered about 10 countries in that region. And then 2015 was in Nepal. So, my TEDx talk starts in Nepal. And then I said, enough now. I think I need to zoom out a little bit and find ways to do this differently. I mean, I'll never let go of the cause. It is still the most important thing. It's the dearest to my heart. It is what I will do with my last breath. But there are other ways to do it, which is a message that it took me a while, maybe, to understand, and certainly one that I convey to other people who say they want to do something, right? As you asked me earlier, what can I do? So I moved into academia. I took a little pivot, moved to Lebanon, and ran the Arab Institute for Women, which is an academic and activist institute that covers the Arab region. And I did that for 4 years in Lebanon and continued doing it remotely because, we were all remote somewhere for a period of time. And now, as of a year ago, I decided to branch out on my own. So I write, I speak, I advise, I do whatever it takes with whatever I've got. I'm trying to figure it out. I'm building this road as I walk it. I'm writing books, I'm writing blogs, I'm doing talks. I spend a lot of time just talking to people who want advice or want to know or want to listen. So I do a lot of talking, as you can imagine. That's not a tough one for me. But I feel like it's a new way to talk about my experience and to share what I've done. I don't need to be on the front lines. Well, because actually the front lines are everywhere. The front lines are in front of me right here in the city. And I try and tell people that. And I think of myself as like a fire starter, let me light fires in other people to go off. If they want to go off over there, if they want to go off right here next door, it's all the same. And I think it's great and it's important work. As long as we do it, it doesn't matter where we do it from.
So you mentioned all of the things that you're doing, and what I want to do is just let people know how they can connect with you. So you have your website, linaabiRafeh.com, and of course across social media. I know that I've connected with you. I've seen your TikToks. I've looked at your YouTube channel, as well as LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. Yeah, we're friends, but I'm a fan as well. I can admit it. It's fine. um, so what I want to know is on a more personal level for you. Can you tell me kind of about your fears and maybe levels of confidence as you enter different areas? Like, how much confidence was there going to Afghanistan versus Haiti? And then how much fear was there? How did you manage those powerful emotions? I imagine they're extreme. There was no taking days off for Netflix or spa days. So
No, I mean, you're signing up for a tough fight that is not just a job. You can't clock out at 5 p.m. and say, I'm going for a drink, going to dinner, going to a show, going to the gym. You do none of those things. You never clock out because you are living in it. You're immersed, you're marinating in this situation. So for me, doing that was overwhelming, certainly exhausting, terrifying initially, being in my first war zone, which was Afghanistan. But at a certain point when I got there, I spent the first month feeling pretty afraid, thinking, okay, there are a lot of situations that are just too sticky and too close. And there were so many near misses that I experienced, like a car bomb went off just as I had left a certain scene. And, I thought, okay, this is scary. And I'm putting my life on the line, even for the most mundane things every single day. Just to simply exist in that space is a risk for me. And I thought to myself, all right, if I'm going to continue to be scared, I'm not going to be effective. And I always had this sense that
wow.
there was something much bigger at stake than me and my fear. And I don't know how it happened, but I just parked it. I decided that either I was going to live this experience being afraid of every step I took because, who knows where the landmine is, quite literally. It's one of the most heavily mined countries in the world. Or I'm just going to keep going, come what may, because I'm here for something bigger than me. So every time I sat down and thought, gosh, I'm afraid, I'm tired, or I'm fed up, or I'm drained, or I'm upset, or whatever emotion would obstruct my work, I was able to kind of put it in a box and say that I'm here for something that isn't me. It's much more important. And that kept me going. That sense of I'm here to be effective. I'm here to do something. I'm not here on a holiday. I'm not here for fun. There's a purpose and I'm here to fulfill it. And being afraid is just going to get in the way.
That is so powerful. That is so powerful. I think the way that I would summarize what you just said is in the micro moments before a car bomb and after a car bomb, when you go to sleep and when you wake up, you have a choice. I'm going to be afraid or I'm going to be effective. And when I put it like that, I remind myself, which I think that sounds odd, but that's that's how I say it. I remind myself of this Brene Brown quote
Yeah.
where she says, if courage is my value, then I have to do it regardless of the results. And I think that's a level of commitment that most of us, it's one thing to say we've never had that level of commitment, but it's another thing to say that we've never been forced to be that committed because you didn't choose that. You would much rather have shown up and been like, wow, it's not so bad here. Let me just hang out. But you were literally in the life-saving process every day. And one thing you and I have never really dug into and talked about were things like landmines and car bombs. But that's part of it because going to these war zones or these natural disasters to prevent violence against women did not mean bringing your catalog of PowerPoint presentations. It was food, water, shelter. It's dangerous on that block. Get to this block. I can't even imagine. Oh wow, it's so powerful. I can't even imagine. Um, so like I said before, that's why we may have to have multiple parts of this because I'm just so fascinated by the work because I'm an emotional person, and so you can talk about your experiences, and I have a tendency to feel the feeling and the energy. But what I want to know now, is so kind of what's going on now? What's your focus? Like, is there a specific subject, target, location where you're just thinking, okay, now this is where my efforts are going?
I'm going to answer that by taking us back just one step because for me, being afraid of the risks, security risks, landmines and car bombs and all of that stuff is absolutely present. And I was afraid. But at the same time, I was also at risk of the very things that I was trying to prevent with other women.
Yes.
I experienced sexual harassment in the field. I have my own kind of security risks. So you realize that in some ways you are powerless to the very, you come here thinking, well, you're going to fix it and save everybody and deliver safety and all that. But you can't even do it for yourself. So to answer your second question, what am I doing? I realized at a certain point in all of my time in the field that it's really about women's safety. It's about human safety. It's about, do we feel safe in our bodies, in our lives, in this space, in this time? And we have a right to. So, why not? And what is going wrong? And unless we have that safety, everything else is pointless. You can tell me, well, here's all this great economic opportunity for you, or look, there's a quota for women in politics, or we just built you a dozen schools for girls in the village. Well, if you're not safe in your home or walking to school or being in school or whatever, then there's no point, right? So that is the starting point. That is the non-negotiable. It is the foundation on which everything else needs to be built. So when I started thinking about women's safety, I think when I write, I think through my fingers. So I started to write about it. So I have just completed a first draft of my memoir. I am putting myself back in my own story, which is something that, we don't do in this field. Like, as an aid worker, you're supposed to be some selfless superhero. You aren't, but that's the perception, that you erase the me and it's all about the we, and you come in and you're like, I'm here, gonna fix it. And when you write reports, or even the books that I've written, it's as if I wasn't actually there. I'm just telling you about a situation that I observed, like a fly on the wall, or like, looking at bacteria through a microscope. But I'm actually um, going back on all of that to say, wait, well, I was there and things happened to me, and I am just as much a part of these stories. And they are in parallel to the stories that I experienced, stuff as a girl in that classroom, things I saw in Saudi Arabia, things I experienced in the workplace, in relationships. I am these women and they are me. So it's all connecting those stories. And the theme is really around safety.
So
So
you
that's
you
what's coming.
you say that, and yeah, I'm gonna try to win the award for being the first one to buy your book. But when you talk about putting yourself in the story, a couple things that come to mind. First of all, really two or three things, right? My mind has been racing the whole time we've been talking, but real quick, I'm gonna say that you said something in one of your talks that I saw on your YouTube channel. You said something like it is time for rage. Like it's been long enough. It is time for us to feel rage, and I felt those words so powerfully. But I want to think. Well, I'm thinking about, first of all, in your book, when you talk about different situations, not every woman can relate to what you did, right? Not every woman went to Afghanistan or went to Rwanda, Congo, Haiti. Not every woman did that, but there are emotions you felt that every woman could relate to. I will say that over 80% of women in prison in the United States have experienced some form of abuse or violence. And I will say that a study conducted, I don't remember exactly when, but thousands upon thousands of people were asked these questions. It was the ACE questionnaire study, right? ACE, for Adverse Childhood Experiences, and that study showed that 1 in 4 girls are sexually assaulted prior to the age of 18, and that's just in the United States. That was not globally, especially in some of these poorer countries. But I guess my question to you, right? We only have a couple minutes left. My question to you is, when you write about certain events in your book, do you say to yourself something to the effect of, wow, how did I do that? Or wow, I was brave?
It's a little bit of that's crazy. Like, would I do that now? But in my late 40s, as I am, you make very different decisions. So I look back on 22-year-old me who started out, and I think, oh well, that was an interesting character. Like, she's grown up, she's changed. She was driven. Courageous might be a word, crazy might be another word. Um, but it's amazing to kind of see yourself on the screen, as it were, and come to terms with your own story and the why of it all. It's a beautiful journey. Actually, I was telling you earlier, I wake up every day and all I want to do is write, and it seems to
Yes.
be coming out of, it seems to be the right time, and these seem to be the words. And I certainly hope that it is widely read and it is relatable and it is understood and the message is clear, and it's not something that is, just for people who've been in these extreme circumstances that I've been in. Because for me, I call these experiences the feeling of being unsafe. It's not any different on the street in New York if I'm walking down a dark alley at night, or in the forms are different. It's certainly not Afghanistan, but the feeling is the same. That feeling of being afraid for yourself, that feeling that you can't be here, you don't have a right to be here, you're putting yourself at risk by being here. I call it the unbearable ordinary, because that's really what
Wow.
it is. It's so pervasive that we don't even think about it. And as women, and especially as young women, I watch, like, They travel in packs. There's a lot of the call each other when you get home type of thing, and tell me where you are, and track yourself on whatever device so I know where you're going, and don't go to the bathroom by yourself, and cover your drinks so no one puts anything in it. You're living a life that's restricted with freedoms that are curbed, and you're suffocating under the weight of that, carrying the burden of your own safety. And I don't want to live like that. I don't want girls to live like that. I don't want your
And
daughter
when you
to live
say
like
that,
that.
you say that, and yeah, it does make me angry, right? The unbearable ordinary, where it doesn't even trigger like your nervous system, your fight or flight. It's just what you do. I just You just look back every few steps. You just cover your drink. You just do this. You just do that, and it's just what it takes to be safe. And while you may call it the unbearable ordinary, for people like me, it could not even imagine. Why would I leave the house? Wow. And so, on that note, as we're running out of time, we have a few seconds left. I wish we had a couple hours. I just want your last words, your last message for our audience as we close out.
I want people to know that it sounds like we're helpless, but we're not. And it's not
Yes.
hopeless at all. I mean, we are not as powerful as we should be, but we are gaining power every day. And I see those changes. I see them in the young generation. I have an 8-year-old niece, and I use her as a barometer. And she thinks things and does things that the 8-year-old me would not have understood. She is powerful and knows who she is and stands her ground, and is taught that with her parents, certainly in school and society. She knows that she has a right to be here just as much as anybody else. And I love that. And so that gives me hope. And I think there is hope. It's coming.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you so much. This is so powerful. And I can't wait to do this again. And to everyone who watched this live or on a replay, we appreciate you. And remember that we are not powerless, and also that we can choose to live every day with kindness, optimism, positivity, and empathy. Until next time, take care of yourselves.